Turning now to the 2020 election, the stakes are extremely high for Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders as 6 states hold key races today. Democratic contests are underway in Washington state, Idaho, North Dakota, Michigan, Missouri, and Mississippi.
More than 350 delegates are up for grabs, with Michigan awarding the most. Some of the latest polls out of the state show Joe Biden in the lead, despite Senator Bernie Sanders winning Michigan back in 2016. Ed O'Keefe has the latest from Detroit.
I am so proud to endorse Joe Biden to be the next president of the United States.
With polls giving him a big lead in Michigan, Joe Biden campaigned with some prominent supporters, including Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer. It was a show of unity among moderates in the party.
We're going to unite Democrats, Republicans, independents of every stripe. That's what the nation needs. We got to bring the country together.
Bernie Sanders won the Michigan primary 4 years ago and needs to win again if he has any hope of catching Biden in the delegate race.
One of the differences, if I might say, between Joe Biden and myself is that Joe bailed out the crooks on Wall Street who nearly destroyed our economy 12 years ago.
As the coronavirus spreads nationwide, and with both candidates in their 70s and attracting large crowds, California Congresswoman Jackie Speer called on all candidates for president to stop holding public rallies and large-scale events, adding the candidates must lead by example. The Biden team responded saying it would continue to closely follow guidance from health officials, but that it plans to continue running an aggressive national campaign. In recent days, hand sanitizer has been front and center at Biden and Sanders campaign events.
We do not hold a rally without first conferring with local public health officials.
Sanders did not say what, if any, precaution he's specifically taking.
I'm surrounded by medical personnel. Thank you for asking. I'm running for president of the United States, and that requires a whole lot of work.
So Ed O'Keefe is joining us now from Detroit, while CBSN political reporter Caitlin Huey-Burns is joining us on the set. Caitlin, I'm going to start with you. So Joe Biden is in the lead in regards to delegates moving into today. Does it look like, based on the states, based on the polling, he's going to keep that lead?
Well, I think tonight is one of the last chances for Bernie Sanders to blunt the momentum coming from Joe Biden. Remember, last week we were talking about South Carolina and Super Tuesday being an attempt by the Biden campaign to stop Bernie Sanders. I think tonight is make or break, really, for Bernie Sanders because he had such an overwhelming victory in Michigan last time. And you can argue that that was a sign of not only the prolonged primary that would come in 2016, but also Hillary Clinton's weaknesses, especially among black voters and people in the suburbs. I think that for Biden, he's looking tonight to try to shore up the support. If he does well in Michigan tonight, and if he builds a coalition that shows what he's been wanting to show, which is getting suburban women, getting people in Detroit, getting the support from black voters, I think that will put him closer to the path.
And as we mentioned, Michigan has the highest number of delegates up for grabs today out of the 6 states. As you know, Senator Sanders won Michigan in 2016 against Hillary Clinton. However, the latest polls show Joe Biden leading. So I guess what's behind the apparent shift there?
Part of it is what Joe Biden has been able to pull off really in the last 10 days. The fact that he overwhelmingly won South Carolina, did so well on Super Tuesday, and now by Democrats nationwide is increasingly seen as the guy to beat. As Caitlin said, this has the right mix of a coalition for Biden between suburban voters, black voters, moderate Democrats, and a real understanding in this state that Democrats need to turn out in bigger numbers than they did 4 years ago to get a president elected who is a Democrat. They have been making that point on the trail here throughout the weekend that Democrats need to do more to turn out people that didn't show up 4 years ago. Both Biden and Sanders believe they can do it here in this state, and we'll see. But Biden continues to make the point also. He says, you know, Sanders has talked for a while about the need to turn out bigger crowds and make sure that they go to the polls. Well, we're doing that. We did it in Virginia. We did it in North Carolina. We did it in South Carolina. We're going to do it in Michigan as well. Gets a lot of applause. And there's a big reason to believe now, based on 2 surveys and the momentum that Biden has, that it could be a pretty good night for him here in the Wolverine state.
And Caitlin, sort of the other challenge for Bernie Sanders is the African-American vote, particularly in the South. Mississippi is one of the states that's voting today. And kind of all along there had this conversation about, well, you know what it is? It's that Bernie Sanders is really attractive to younger black voters, while Biden is attractive to older black voters. But then After Super Tuesday, that argument didn't seem as strong. How's he doing with that demographic?
Well, it's a challenge, and it was interesting when Bernie Sanders went to Michigan this week that he added to his schedule stop in Flint, Michigan. He got an endorsement from Jesse Jackson. This was an acknowledgement that he needed to do better with this demographic, and it's really interesting because as Democrats debate about how to win back places like Michigan, how to win back places in the Midwest, there was this argument of, do you try to turn out Trump supporters? Do you try to convert them back? Or do you try to run up your numbers in places like Detroit? Kamala Harris gave a really interesting speech last year at the NAACP while she was in Michigan, saying that Democrats need to focus on places like Detroit. When they're talking about winning back the Midwest, they're not talking about winning back African-American voters, and that's really important, or getting them to show up in the numbers that they previously did. So I think that was significant to have them there. I think this contest in Mississippi, while there aren't as many delegates up for grabs, really does help to bolster Joe Biden's argument and the Democrats' argument at large, which is you need support from black voters in order to win the nomination and to win the general election.
You know, Ed, something that Caitlin and I and Anne-Marie were talking about before we turned on the cameras is the idea that in the last 10 days, as you pointed out, since perhaps South Carolina, we've started to see a shift in that there's not a lot of discussion. I'm sure voters are still talking about the issues that matter to them and the issues that they discuss around the kitchen table, but it does feel as if right now Democrats are focused on finding a way to beat Donald Trump, and that has taken a larger significance even ahead of some of those issues that they figure they'll get to once they have a nominee. How do you see it?
Absolutely, and that's to the detriment of the Sanders campaign, which has tried to continue to raise concerns about the fact that Biden doesn't support Medicare for all, despite the fact that exit polls have shown us consistently that about 6 in 10 Democrats who show up to vote support abolishing private health insurance in favor of a government-run plan. The other issue that Sanders has tried in the past week to bring up and will continue to hammer into next week's Florida primary especially is the fact that back in the 1990s, as a senator during debates over how to balance the budget, Joe Biden, then a senator from Delaware, raised the prospects of changing the way Social Security was paid for, in essence, potentially cutting into it. Making the point, Sanders, is that while he has stood by entitlement programs his entire career, at least at one time, Biden was in favor of potentially cutting into Social Security, which, of course, is so important to retirees across Florida, Arizona, and other Midwestern states that are voting this week and next. And yet, that argument doesn't seem to be clicking, in part because Biden turns around and says, well, look, that was in the 90s. You know now that I'm a big fan of this. And he's been arguing on the campaign trail in terms of health care. People can't afford to wait around for a revolution to take effect. The transition from the current system, which is essentially rooted in Obamacare, to a more government-run system that Bernie Sanders would like to implement would once again be too disruptive, and that patients who need care now and maybe enjoying the care if they just need some tweaks to it don't necessarily want to go through another disruption. So on policy, on the politics of all this, Biden does appear to have the upper hand. We shall see tonight whether Sanders can keep it close. Remember, in all of these contests, they are proportional. You have to get at least 15% of the vote. It looks as if Sanders probably will do that, so he'll continue collecting at least some delegates. But given that Biden has such a big lead in places like here in Michigan, it's expected he'll get much more.
All right. Caitlin, always great to have you. Ed, on the road for us. Thank you, my man, as always.